Welcome to the Banderpod, the audio and audacious podcast of Bandersnatch Books. We're a small press publisher of treasures found off the beaten path for lovers of all that is good, true, and beautiful. I'm SDG Morgan, and for this final episode of Season 5, we have a treat for you. We're sharing the first 3 chapters of the audiobook for Glenn McCarty's novel, The Song of the Stone Tiger. We're doing this because we're all really excited that Glenn and Bandersnatch have been nominated for Best Audiobook of the Year at the SELA Awards. And when we get excited here at Bandersnatch Books, then we want to share the joy. If you like what you hear, then you can go to our show notes and find where to get the entire audiobook for The Song of the Stone Tiger. Without any more further ado, here's Glenn McCarty reading The Song of the Stone Tiger.
The Song of the Stone Tiger, written and read for you by Glenn McCarty. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Corner Bedroom. Once upon a time, in the corner bedroom of a crooked yellow house tucked against the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, a boy named Thomas woke up. Now, this in itself was nothing remarkable. Boys wake up in bedrooms all across the world, every single morning, as you know. The fact that neither the bedroom nor the house belonged to the boy was only slightly more remarkable. Had Thomas Spencer awakened in his usual bedroom, in his usual house, he would have heard the usual sounds of morning. Water swishing through the pipes in the wall, microwave beeping in the kitchen, taxis honking, and truck brakes wheeshing outside his window. All the usual signs it was time to begin the frantic race to meet the school bus that would hiss to a stop outside his brick front townhome in North Philadelphia at 8:15. But this morning contained none of those usual sounds, and as Thomas's eyes fluttered open, he remembered why, and he smiled. It was the first day of summer vacation. Thomas wedged himself deep under the billow of bedclothes, stretching his toes as far as they could go. Summer. He could picture his bike propped against the garage door, waiting to be ridden. His left-handed baseball mitt waiting to be pounded, ready for the first towering fly ball. A woodpecker thrummed against a tree outside his window. Thomas sat up, shrugging off his blanket cocoon, and glanced across the dim room. Something was wrong. Where was his dresser? His Phillies posters and the models of the space station? Thomas felt himself shrinking from the strangeness of the place and lunged across the not-his-own bed. He yanked the curtains, sending the blue light of morning spilling across him, and he remembered. He was not at home. He was not even in Philadelphia. He was tucked into this corner bedroom in the house of his Aunt Cecilia in Boone, North Carolina, hundreds of miles from the spraying fire hydrants, dusty ball fields, and cool museum floors of a Philadelphia summer. His family had pulled into her long, windy driveway yesterday afternoon, and they would be staying all summer so his mother could rest and recover from... Thomas didn't want to remember anything more. He fumbled on the strange nightstand beside his bed and turned the clock toward him. Its large orange numbers glared at him. 6:27. Why was he up so early? He leaned toward the wall. Last night, his first in this strange room, he had discovered a spot behind the wall that seemed to bring the sounds from downstairs to his ear, as if by magic. He pressed his ear to the wall and waited to see what he could hear, staring at the seam in the wallpaper in front of him. Circus animals. He was nearly 11 years old, yet Aunt Cecilia had put him in a room decorated for a boy half his age. Shouldn't she have known he was getting a bit too old for tigers, monkeys, and bears parading in neat columns up and down the walls? He found a loose bit of wallpaper and gave it a little tug. The glue left his fingertips sticky, but for the moment it took his mind off last night. His mom's dizziness, again, the fall, and her early bedtime. He didn't mean to peel so much, but every bit of wallpaper stripped away made his room seem a little less spooky. The questions in his head retreated a little. If this was a summer for recovery, why had Mom gotten so lightheaded after their hike yesterday? 9 months of relief had vanished in an instant. Thomas pulled back his hand, a strip as long as his arm dangling loose. He smoothed it back into place, then slipped from bed and slid on a pair of loose-fitting shorts. He was a slender boy with his mother's gray eyes and a flop of his father's sandy hair hanging over his forehead. He swept it back and crept toward the large bay window, his bare feet creaking on the smooth hardwood. Thomas brushed aside the curtains and stared over the front yard, with its white picket fence, down the hill to the town of Boone. The little streets were filling up, car headlights twinkling in the blue dawn. A garbage truck chugged down a side street, leaving a puff of exhaust behind. Resting his elbows on the window ledge, Thomas let his eyes drift upward, over the town toward the mountains looming behind it. Clothed in green jackets and mist, they seemed like a painting out of a picture book. Thomas could almost imagine there were dwarves inside, their pickaxes rising and falling as they mined for ore to make their armor and weapons. Staring at the mountains made Thomas feel like his head was swirling with stories. It was hard to explain this wordless feeling which came over him when he least expected it. Back home, when he waited for the school bus and the morning sunlight cast golden shadows across the cobblestone sidewalk, he could feel a sudden tugging in his chest. It was like a voice was telling him to pay attention, or he would miss something important. Dad called him a mooner, pining for the horizon like a lost sailor. But Mom would always elbow his father after he said that. Thomas never seemed to be able to put the feelings into words, as though the stories were stuck inside him, with no way to let them out. Thomas wished he had his notebook handy and a pencil to at least sketch these green-coated mountains. Footsteps on the stairs sent Thomas running for his bed. For some reason, he felt like he was not supposed to be up yet, creeping around this new room. With 3 big strides, he dove under the covers and tucked himself in, face to face with a painted tiger, frozen in place on the wall with its front paw raised. The door creaked open and Thomas's father stuck his head in. "Thomas? You up?" "Yeah," Thomas said, trying to sound sleepy. "Good," his father said. "Can you get dressed and come downstairs? There's been a change of plans." Thomas's heart began to beat faster. "Are we still going to have Dude Day?" His father paused. "Just come downstairs, buddy. Okay?" "Okay," Thomas answered. His dad shut the door. Thomas reached again for the strip of loose wallpaper and began to peel. Chapter 2. Dude Day Postponed. "Thomas! Aunt Sissy has coloring books!" Thomas's 5-year-old sister, Eugenia, sat at the kitchen table, a fistful of crayons in her left hand. Her messy brown hair stuck out from under a plastic silver crown, and her bare feet kicked gently against the table leg. "I'm doing a picture of a queen," she proclaimed, adjusting the straps of her yellow princess dress. "Aunt Sissy says I look just like one." "This morning, darling. You sure do," Aunt Cecilia said in the drawl she had never lost. The house had been her childhood home, and while her sister had moved away for college and never returned, Cecilia had remained here in North Carolina, leaning into a world of grits and church pews and potlucks that Thomas had never quite managed to figure out despite all his visits. Cecilia stood at the counter, stirring a spoon into a large yellow mug. "More appealing to look at than Rick and his absent-minded lumberjack look over there," she said. Thomas's father brushed the wrinkles out of his flannel shirt and scowled at her. Cecilia noticed Thomas and said, "There's the other man of the house. Come here and give Aunt Sissy some sugar." Thomas trudged over to his aunt and allowed himself her hugs and kisses, glancing around the kitchen as she squeezed. No Mom. Was she still asleep? What did that mean? "I brought you something, too," Cecilia whispered in Thomas's ear. "But it's an outside gift." She winked and squeezed his hand. Aunt Cecilia was short and pretty like Mom, but with the sort of spunk only an aunt could get away with. She had bought the crooked yellow house after her husband Bill had passed away 4 years earlier. Now she managed an art gallery in town. Thomas liked her paintings, which were mostly of landscapes, tall, craggy mountains reaching to the sky like rows of crooked fingers, or fields of wildflowers in every shade of the rainbow. "I don't paint things the way I see 'em," she said. "I paint 'em the way I think they used to be, when the world was younger and not as faded." Thomas's favorite painting was of a place in England called Cornwall, where Bill had grown up, the sky crisp and blue and the seashore brilliant white. Hanging there in the kitchen, the painting looked so fresh and cool he could almost taste the salt water on his tongue. "You're dressed for exploring, I see," his father said. He removed his cap and scratched his head. "Yeah," Thomas said. "You said—" Dad nodded. "The reconnaissance mission we talked about yesterday." He sighed and ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Here's the thing. I'm expecting a phone call any minute. You let Aunt Cecilia fix you some breakfast, help her with those boxes, and by then I should be ready for some scouting. Sound good?" Thomas felt his heart begin to beat faster again, remembering the mountains and the forest. "The weather's just perfect for adventures." "It is?" Thomas asked. "Yep. Soon as this fog burns off, it's going to be a fine morning. Nice breeze, sky clear as a bell and blue as a maiden's bonnet." Dad sucked in a bellyful of air, his chest puffed way out. "Kids, your father's drifted into his storybook talk. Pretty soon he's going to start addressing me as yon fair and lovely dame." Cecilia turned to Thomas. "How do eggs sunny side up sound?" Thomas nodded hungrily and slid into a chair. One of Eugenia's crayons rolled off the table. As Thomas bent to scoop it up, he heard the phone ring in the next room. He replaced the crayon and saw his father disappear through the doorway. Thomas took a sip of juice and waited, trying to make out his father's conversation. Aunt Cecilia cracked an egg into a hot pan with a sizzle. After a moment, Dad appeared at the doorway. Aunt Cecilia glanced at him, wooden spoon halfway to the pan. They exchanged a look that Thomas couldn't translate. "Who was it?" Thomas asked. Thomas's father moved toward the table and crouched beside Thomas. "After last night, I thought it might be a good idea to give the doctor a call, as a precaution." "The doctor? Now?" Thomas asked, his throat suddenly dry. "Well, it's been 9 months of remission, but you know how the past few weeks have been. I just want to make sure everything's fine. So I'm taking your mother in for a blood test this morning. We should be back by this afternoon." Without warning, the familiar tang of bitterness boiled in Thomas's throat. He knew how the past few weeks had been. He clenched his eyes shut, like Dr. Norton had taught him, and focused on the seashore, waves lapping the shore, gently moving in and out, in and out. As he counted, the numbers flipped through his head, and slowly the swirling subsided. He opened his eyes to see Aunt Cecilia standing over him with a plate of breakfast. "But everything's fine, right?" Thomas asked. "The treatment worked. It's been 9 months, like you said." "Of course it did," Aunt Cecilia said, setting Thomas's plate in front of him. "That's why you're here, for your mother's rest and a recuperation. I reckon there's something about the Appalachians that will set her mind at ease. You mark my words. Being in the house we grew up in as girls on the doorstep of the forest will bring her back to new in no time." "Right." Thomas swallowed the bitter taste in his mouth. "But what about due day?" he asked. "Reconnaissance." His father stood. "Tell you what, you get out there by yourself, do some scouting. Find out what dangerous beasties lurk inside the mist-shrouded hollows of yon sapphire forests." He smiled, but Thomas could see the unease lurking behind his eyes. "Oh, here we go again," Aunt Cecilia said. The tea kettle whistled, and she moved to the stove. "Skedaddle now, Rick," she said. "I'll take care of things until you get back." Thomas's dad lifted his keys from the hook next to the door. "I'm going to clean out the car from the trip yesterday before we go." He shut the door. Thomas stared at his eggs. "Aunt Sissy, color with me," Eugenia called. "Just 1 second," Aunt Cecilia said. She refilled her mug and set the kettle back on the stove. "Ready for that gift?" she asked Thomas. "I thought you said it was for later." "I've suddenly decided you could use it now, if you'd like a gift," she said with a wink, picking up a brown paper bag from the counter. Thomas shoved his plate of eggs away from him and followed his aunt onto the front porch, feeling the cool morning air prickle his bare legs. Aunt Cecilia found a seat in a slant-backed wooden chair and pointed to the seat next to her. Thomas sat, tucking his knees to his chest and wrapping his arms around them. "Not used to these mountain mornings, huh?" she asked. "I guess not," Thomas said. "There's a lot about North Carolina that'll surprise you," she said. "And speaking of surprises, this ought to keep you plenty busy on your scouting mission." She pulled a wrapped package from the bag. Thomas blinked. Only on his birthday did he get packages in wrapping paper. "Go on, it won't bite," she said. Thomas peeled the paper back, gently as wallpaper. Aunt Cecilia cleared her throat. Thomas glanced up and with a loud rip tore the rest of the paper off. It floated to the ground, and Thomas looked down at the present in his hand. It was a small white net attached to a long wooden handle. Inside the net lay a small plastic box with clear sides. Thomas took the box out of the net and noticed a small door at one end, fastened with a tiny clasp. He flicked the clasp, and the door swung open on 2 small hinges. "It's for catching bugs," Aunt Cecilia explained. "The flying kind mostly. Right about now, I think there's probably a dragonfly out there with your name on it. Damselflies, too. Later in the summer, you can catch butterflies and moths." "Really?" "Sure thing. After you snag 'em, you put 'em inside the little box and watch 'em fly around for a while. When you feel like it, you let 'em go and catch some more." She leaned close. "And trust me, there are all kinds of beautiful creatures out there waiting for you to find 'em. Your mother would even say there are fairies." "Fairies?" Thomas asked. "Myself, I'm not too sure about that," she said. Thomas folded his arms across his chest. "Aunt Cecilia, I think I'm getting a little too old for magic. I'm going to be 11 at the end of the summer." 11? Oh my, she smirked. "Well then, I'd say the older you get, the more you understand how important things like fairies and magic are." "Huh? That doesn't make any sense." "It does to me. You'll see." She stood and walked to the edge of the porch. "Come on, have a look down the hill with me." Thomas leaned against the railing, the limbs of the magnolia tree rustling its clean white blossoms with the breeze. A mourning dove cooed from the higher branches. "Ooh, ooh, 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 ooh." And somewhere down the hill, a lawnmower growled to life. The world was waking up with the morning. Thomas could feel that same tugging in his chest he had felt at his bedroom window. His eyes flitted to the mountains. Suddenly, the sound of a car door slamming pulled him back. Thomas raced off the porch to see a van backing down the driveway. It passed him, and he skidded to a stop, catching a glimpse of his mother's face at the window. The car braked, and she rolled down the window. "We'll be back soon," she said, the trace of an accent drawling her words. "You mind your aunt, all right?" Even in the morning light, her face seemed pale, and Thomas stuck a hand through the open window. She squeezed it, and his heart settled at the strength of her grip. "Love you," she said. The car eased backward and followed the curve of the driveway down the hill. Thomas watched the car disappear, absent-mindedly spinning the handle of the net between his fingers. A memory sprang into his mind. His mother tucked beneath a thin green blanket in yet another hospital bed, machines beeping on all sides. Back at the doctor's, after she had seen so many back home. This was not supposed to be the summer for all of that. He gripped the handle tighter and moved numbly across the porch to the house. He set the bug box carefully into his new net and carried them both back inside. The screen door clattered shut behind him, and he started for the stairs. "Soon," he told the world, which awaited him just beyond the front porch. "I'll be out soon." Chapter 3. Into Canaan Woods. Achoo! Thomas swiped the back of his hand across his nose. With each trip to the attic, a fresh cloud of dust settled over him, causing a sneezing fit that made his travels upstairs take twice as long. By the time he slammed the attic door and thumped back to the first floor, light was streaming through the east-facing picture window in the downstairs hall. He was afraid to look at the clock. Wait too long, and Aunt Cecilia would want to make him wait for a proper lunch before he left, and he didn't have time for that. If he was lucky, he could snag a peanut butter sandwich and stuff it into his pocket on the way out the door. He passed the grandfather clock in the hall and glanced at the time. 10:30. He had to hurry. Thomas ducked into the kitchen and scrambled onto the counter, pulling the bread and peanut butter from their high cabinet. He was finishing spreading when Aunt Cecilia appeared in the doorway. "All done," he said, dropping the knife. "At least take a banana," she said, scooping up a piece of fruit from the bowl on the table. "2 sandwiches?" she asked. Thomas stuffed the sandwiches into his pocket, then wedged the banana in. She smiled. "It's a good thing peanut butter on white bread tastes the same when it's flat, huh?" "That's the truth." "Where will you be in case I want to find you?" "I thought I'd start in the backyard," Thomas said, picking up the butterfly net from its place on the kitchen table. "See what I could find." "You not going into Canaan Woods?" she asked. "Where's that?" "Down the hill and across the back field. Your mother and I spent so much time in Canaan Woods when we were girls. Your grandma used to say we had ivy for hair and creek water in our veins. I'm surprised Deborah never mentioned it." Her eyes drifted toward the kitchen window. Thomas shrugged. "Nah, I thought I'd stick to the backyard. Give Dad the scouting report there first." "All right," Cecilia said. "You better get out there then. Days a wasting." Thomas picked up his bug net and opened the back door and walked out into the morning. The sticky smell of pine filled the air, and he drew a deep breath. Was it the thought of exploring or going alone that sent a flutter through his chest? Dad had been right. The morning fog had burned off, leaving behind a sky of smooth, brilliant blue. The door handle, the wind chimes, even the pale pink flesh of his arms and legs seemed to shine in the sun. Thomas reached the edge of the brick patio and plunged onto the lawn. The blades of grass tickled his ankles above the tops of his socks as he scuffed ahead in his battered blue Nikes. The breeze brought the sound of an unknown birdsong fluttering down to meet him, and somewhere down the hill he could just make out the faint burbling of a stream. Thomas reached the fence at the back of the yard and looked through the wood slats. On the other side, the ground sloped away, leveling off below him in a large open field marked by the smiling yellow faces of dandelions. Beyond the field, Thomas could make out the forest with its cool, shadowed trees surging upward toward the sky. Something about the way they rose into the air like walls of a fortress made him shiver unconsciously. He would go a little further. Still, he would stay on this side of the woods for today. Thomas found the fence gate and opened the latch. He started down the hill in an awkward shuffle run, the slope too steep to keep a steady pace. He liked the feeling of falling in slow motion down the hill. His sneakers kicked up white tufts of dandelion, scattering seeds through the air. He stumbled, then gave in and broke into a run. At the base of the hill, Thomas stopped and turned to look back up at the crooked yellow house perched high on the hill. From this angle it seemed to wobble, like a good stiff wind would blow it clean off the edge. A buzzing caught Thomas's ear. A flash of purple darted past him, and he whirled, remembering Aunt Cecilia's fairy talk, but it was only a dragonfly. He smiled. The bug zipped upwards, then hovered a few feet away. Eyes fixed on the insect, Thomas raised his bug net. It would be a fine first catch. Fists wrapped tight around the wooden handle, Thomas crept forward into the long grass. With every step, his eyes tracked the hyper-dizzy flight of the dragonfly. It zipped downward, then sideways, perching for a moment on the green petals that ringed the purple thumb of a clover plant. Thomas stood still as a statue, waiting for the right moment. He had never done this before. How would he know when was the right time to swing his net? Up close, Thomas could see the dragonfly's small arms gripping the leaf as its marble-round head looked up, down, sideways. He tightened his hand, raised the net. Zip! The dragonfly whizzed ahead, out of Thomas's reach. He swung the net awkwardly, and it slid from his hand. Shaking his head, Thomas ducked and snagged the net, then charged through the field after the fugitive dragonfly. Heavy footsteps thudded against the ground as he followed the dragonfly through the shaggy clumps of grass. There it was! No, it wasn't. Finally, Thomas glanced left and right, then knew he had completely lost the dragonfly. He glanced ahead of him and his eyes widened. His frantic chase had deposited him on the far end of the field of dandelions. A few paces ahead, the ground sloped down to a narrow stream. Beyond the stream stood the fortress of trees, oak trees, maybe, that marked what Aunt Cecilia had called Canaan Woods. When Thomas had seen the red oaks for the first time from hundreds of yards away, he had known they were large. Up close, they were massive, ancient trees, each grooved trunk at least a yard wide. Thomas knew that for each year of life, a tree grew the width of a single ring, so that made these trees... He broke off, unable to do the math in his head. He took a step forward and felt acorns crunch under his feet. There was something eerie about standing here in the presence of these old trees and their observant silence. Maybe his mooning side was getting the better of him, but he could almost imagine the trees were alive, and not in the usual way that trees live. Or rather, he thought there was something alive in the trees that was aware of him standing here. Thomas shook his head and stumbled. With a whiz, he heard the dragonfly return, nearly clipping his cheek as it buzzed past. Thomas whirled and swung the net clumsily. Again it slipped from his hand, this time sailing into the stream and landing halfway across. Sighing in frustration, Thomas clambered down into the water, flinching as the water slipped into his socks. He grabbed the net and leapt for a rock, then another, his feet slipping on their slick surfaces. The dragonfly flitted up and over the far bank, right at Thomas's eye level. Thomas paused to measure the distance to the higher ground of the far bank. The dragonfly buzzed away, vanishing among the large trees. Thomas eyed a protruding root as a target, crouched, and jumped. His left foot squished into a muddy hollow underneath the lip of the bank, and his palm struck the mossy knob of the root. Digging his foot into the mud, he grabbed the root and pulled himself up and over the bank, where he lay on his side, soggy and panting. Well, Thomas thought, examining the mud smeared across his arms, that could have gone better. He wiped his hands on his shorts and sat up. The dragonfly was gone, and the forest had slipped into a deep quiet, except for the steady burble of the stream below him. The oaks loomed a few feet ahead. Thomas tried to peer around them, but all seemed to vanish into a haze beyond them. Gathering his net, he stood and studied the tree beside him. His heart pounded as he studied its gnarled, twisting limbs, winding like arms in all directions. Thomas pressed his palm against the damp trunk. "Sentinel trees," he murmured, the visions in his head swirling to life. "That's what you are, standing guard to take note of every intruder to the woods." He nodded, stepping back to glance down the row of trees. "You're the guardians of the greenwood. In order to pass your boundaries, I have to reveal a deep secret as a token. If you accept my token, I may pass into your shadowy embrace. If not, disaster." His voice trailed off, and Thomas shook his head and ducked through a narrow space beside the large oak. He couldn't help but give it a smack as he passed. "I'm not telling you a thing," he whispered. "Caw-caw!" A crow darted from a hidden place high in the branches above. Startled, Thomas stumbled and bumped his head against a low-hanging limb. He rubbed his head and looked up, but the crow was gone. He knelt and laid his bug net at the base of the tree. "That's the only token I'm leaving for now," he said aloud. "But I'll be back to claim it." His voice echoed in the quiet woods, and he could feel a chill sweep through him as he suddenly was aware of how far he was from home and how big the forest was. Hugging the lip of the bank, Thomas moved down the row of trees. The strip of dirt widened, the trees a few steps farther away than when he had crossed. Thomas reached the end of the row of oaks and was able to see beyond them for the first time. A few dozen yards ahead, at the center of a wide clearing, stood a large weeping willow tree. Its narrow, crooked limbs were draped in twining curtains of green and stood in stark contrast to the sturdy branches of the sentinel trees. The tree occupied nearly the entire clearing, its branches blocking any view beyond. Below the willow was a carpet of lush grass, impossibly green in the dim light of the clearing. Thomas edged forward, slowly approaching the willow tree. As he did, a ringing filled his ears. He took a step back. The ringing grew faint. He moved forward. It grew louder. Thomas shook his head, reaching out to take a handful of the willow's long, narrow leaves. He pushed them aside and stepped under the first limb into the curtain made by the willow's dangling branches. Soon he was nearly covered, his face, neck, and arms all brushed by the soft leaves' gentle scratching. Thomas pushed forward and found himself in a kind of hollow, like standing underneath the shelter of a large green umbrella. Within the embrace of the tree, he was completely hidden. It was almost as if he stood in between two worlds. Behind him lay the world with the yellow house and the strange bedroom with riddles to solve about blood tests and doctor visits. Ahead of him lay jewel-green woods and mist-cloaked mountains.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us on the Banderpod for this episode and for all of Season 5. Lord willing, we plan on coming back with a new season in the fall, with lots of great guests. In the meantime, listeners, may you find bookish treasures in your wanderings off the beaten path. Thanks for listening in to our conversation today on the Banderpod. We hope you'll check out our full catalog at Bandersnatch Books. The Banderpod is produced by Rachel S. Donahue, A.B. Donahue, and Carolyn Claire Gibbons. Audio engineering by me, SDG Morgan. Artwork by Evelyn Warnamundi. Many thanks to our friend Chris Slayton of Son of Laughter for our theme song, Cricket in a Jar. Find links and more in the show notes.